Welcome back to the Blue Blasterbot channel, where Mina the Hollower dropped not too long ago, so I think it's time to read more Sonichu. And because I realized I can make the funny number, I paired the two issues together to make the funny number. So let's get into Sonichu 6-7. But before we do, firstly like, comment, subscribe, share, drop a comment, but also, like I said last time, do not buy anything from Chris Chan's website. I know some of y'all think you're funny or you're doing it ironically. Guys, it was a buddy troll, it was a joke. I gave money to an incestual rapist for the meme, guys. Conveniently, as you just called me out. Not only can you buy roughly 2 trades at the IDW comics for what Chris is charging for Sonichu, you can also read the comic on either the Wikipedia or on Webtoon for absolutely free. But enough bitching about Zoomers with too much mom and dad's money-paying predators with TikTok accounts. Let's get into this webcomic with issue 6, episode 12.5, One Lucky Dog. The issue starts with a tribute to Chris Chan's late dog, Patty Chandler. The episode starts with Patty looking up at the moon, wishing she could talk to Chris and let him know how much she appreciates him before eating a 4-leaf clover and going to sleep. Jury's out on whether or not that's an indicator of how well Chris Chan takes care of his pets. Now, whether Petty was just transformed or reincarnated, I don't know, but Chris, if it's the latter, you might want to read Pet Sematary, or watch the movie. I wouldn't recommend paying for it either way, considering Stephen King is a huge creep. But regardless, the next morning, Chris wakes up to see his transformed dog. The two bond for a bit, reminding me of that one cursed image of the sweaty Nintendo guy talking to Crystal from Star Fox, before Chris brings Patty into a portal in his closet, taking her to Kookville, introducing her to his mayoral office, which is located inside the Kookville Mall. I take it that's just how fucked up the city's budget is. We are then introduced to Miss Amber, a former movie star who retired to pursue her dream of becoming a secretary to Chris. I think Chris might have written her motivations to be a bit backwards, wouldn't you say? I feel like a simple in memory of would have sufficed for Patty, but given Chris's delusions, unfortunately, this wasn't just a sweet, albeit misguided, Ken Penders-esque tribute to his dog. Rather, this was a coping mechanism for someone who already has a strained relationship with reality, and unfortunately would be a vulnerability that some, quote-unquote, people would exploit. The episode ends with an ad for Christian and the Hedgehog Boys, a music album. Here's my summary of the album.
This is a song I wrote last summer. It's called Water.
Episode 14, Evil is Afoot. Patty and Darkbine pull up to knock the Dark Mirror Hole out from Mary Lee Walsh's possession and sending her blasting off like Team Rocket. We cut back to the mayoral office at the Kookville Mall as the Sonichus and Rosechus discuss the plan to bring Crystal back. Well, really only a few are actually planning anything at all. The rest are bitching about missing their anime or something equally as irrelevant. Side tangent, I wish Chris would quit with these sideways panels because trying to read them on Webtoon is a pain in the ass. Chris then shouts at everyone, "Shut up!" So Magi-chan the amazing plot dump can explain why the only way to save Crystal is with the 7 Sonichu balls. Darkbine has already gathered a pair, and he's going to use them to save Zelina from a sleeping spell in a flashback that rips off the story of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. They then hear an explosion from downstairs, which turns out to be Shadowchu and a new evil green Sonichu robbing the K Jewelers, walking out with a Sonichu testicle before Chris, Sonichu, and Magi-chan pull up. Sonichu and the other green Sonichu knock out both Sonichu before the green Sonichu uses imaginary technique, purple, and fights Chris in a realm of his own design. The green Sonichu reveals himself to be Natesurk, who gained his own Sonichu form after Chris's medallion was submerged in his dark mirror hole. Side tangent, why the hell did Chris wear that thing literally everywhere he went? That can't be comfortable, not to mention it looks ridiculous. Speaking of ridiculous, Chris dedicates a whole page to showing just how progressive he is and how upset he is by Natesurk's fashion sense. Says the guy who wears that stupid medallion everywhere he goes. Cut to outside the Purple Dome. You'd think Sonichu and Shadowchu would be scrapping, but apparently everyone's waiting patiently for Chris and Cirque to get out. Shadowchew explains that he's concerned because Nate Cirque wants to take over the world, and apparently he's been bullying Shadowchew and putting whipped cream in his rockets, before thirsting after Bubbles Rosechew despite the fact she nearly beat him to death a few issues prior. Also, Magi-chan looks like he caught you masturbating in this panel here. Chris and Nate Cirque get into their Sonichu forms and fight inside the dome. They then fight outside the dome. This battle leads Chris to the gymnasium. Nate Cirque is about to finish Chris Chan off before he gets hit in the head with a basketball and knocked out. Chris wakes up to find it was Bionic the Hedgehog, Chris's first OC from 1999 combining basketball and the blue blur. Nate Cirque recovers 10 weeks later and plots his revenge. The issue ends with the original drawing of Bionic. I fought my autism and won. Depicting autism the same way you would depict something like cancer, but that's just how progressive Chris is. Let's just get into the next issue before I show Bionic here what weaponized autism really means. Episode 15, Time for a Ball. Apparently Bionic has been dating Megaki, which reminds Chris that he's a virgin. Keep in mind, he still rates these comics as TVY7. Anyway, after a long-winded conversation between Chris and Megan, Sonichu and Magi-chan find out where another Sonichu ball is. Conveniently, it's in the high school gymnasium where they just are, but it's back in time because apparently Newton's first law decided to take a sick day that day. Chris then segues into a Family Guy cutaway gag for Seth MacFarlane to use. I don't think he'd want to use this thing, but anyway, let's get into it. Chris decides to be honest about his intellect and appearance and decides to go to the bathroom. He goes into this closet thing before getting sucked into a pipe, grabbed by a hand, put in an orange jumpsuit, and thrown into this Thomas the Tank Engine car and promptly shits in it. Cut back to the actual story, we end up with Comic Chris, Magi-chan making a magic bubble, and Sonichu running backwards to go back in time. Why he couldn't just run in the opposite direction, I don't know, but you gotta love Sonichu's booty warrior face. Regardless, they go back in time, leaving a random woman stunned and a pile of shit on the floor. The issue ends with an ad for Christian Westonchandler's Adult Chronicles for Wii, PS2, and PS3. What, no 360 version, Chris? It would have had a much bigger install base around the time since the PS3 Slim is yet to be released. Either way, the concept sounds like it'd be a shit game, kinda like Heavy Rain but stupider. Episode 16, Time Hogs. The trio find themselves back in time, seeing Chris at 14 years old. In the comic, he quote-unquote managed the Lancers, but in reality he was just the water boy. Yeah, Chris here was such an MVP of the bench, the school district decided to give him a promotion to management. After a sequence that's honestly pretty hard to read, the guys see young Chris get pegged in the head with a Sonichu ball. Sonichu replaces it with a basketball and Chris comes up with Bionic the Hedgehog, and also Beavis and Butthead are there too, I guess. The gang leave, but Chris somehow gets lost in the time void. Oh no. Sonichu breaks the news to Rosechew, and she is, of course, heartbroken. At the private villa of corrupted citizens, the villains gather around a table, including some new faces like these wannabe Ketanayagi twins, Jason from Encyclopedia Dramatica and his woman slave. Okay, one, gotta love Chris's progressivism on full display, but secondly, on what planet is this considered TVY7? They're planning on attacking Kookville now that Chris is gone, because I guess the property values were just that great? I don't know their motivation at this point and I don't really care. Meanwhile, in the time void, Chris has a mental breakdown from all the things that are happening to him in real life as he's making the comic. Chris says Megan broke up with him despite the fact they were never dating. In reality, Chris made the fatal mistake of looking himself up on the internet, hated the fact Jason was calling him a virgin and a loser, and decided to draw a picture of himself finger-banging Megan. Megan, obviously creeped out by this, cut off Chris entirely. Chris tried to explain his actions in an email, but that only poured salt in the wound. We end the issue with a broadcast from K-Kook Radio, hosted by DJ Jamster Sonichu, the lamest character in the whole series, and his girlfriend, Lalisa Rosechew, interviewing Jigliami, who looks like an ulcer. They talk about nothing important for pages upon pages at a time, and we end the issue for another ad for Christian Westonchandler's Adult Chronicles. Now, issue 8 is next up, and if you're watching this thinking it can't get any worse, just you wait. It's gonna make everything thus far look like child's play compared to the depravity of these next few issues. But be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. God bless, Godspeed, stay frosty, and of course, God help us all. See y'all later.